the way that the alkaloids, caffeine, theobromine, theophylline, occur in Yaupon is different than the way they occur in coffee, than the way they occur in tea. And the result is that Yaupon is very gentle.
The way that belief affects performance. If you believe in yourself, you're likely going to perform better.
I agree, 100%. And it almost like has a way of manifesting, when you really feel like it's going to go, it's going to work, it somehow does.
It does.
It does, It
may not be exactly the way that you had envisioned it, but as you adapt.
Florida lacks a posterity mindset. There's not enough people that live here that care about the future. There's a lot of people like us that do. There's a lot of people that do, but there's not enough of them. There's not enough of us.
Hello. In this episode of the Ground Up podcast, I speak with Bryon White. Bryon is a conservationist, an entrepreneur, the co-founder and CEO of Yaupon Brothers American Tea. Bryon has been recognized as a pioneer helping to reintroduce the native Yaupon holly leaf to mainstream consumers. His companies have been featured in Fast Company, Forbes, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Orlando Sentinel.
Good afternoon, Tim.
Thanks for joining me here in the garden.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's lovely.
I'm excited because I love talking to founders and I love talking to native plant entrepreneurs.
Likewise.
So in your case, you're both, so we can dive right in.
Let's do it.
Why don't you start by telling us your story and the origins of Yaupon Brothers?
All right, I'll take a crack at that. Well, so I've always been into plants, especially native plants, from a very young age, and I don't really know why. Just the way the cornbread crumbled. So I've always been into plants and native plants, and a bunch of Yaupon, like this one, was growing across the street from the house I grew up in Smyrna Beach. And I just thought it was a really cool plant. I didn't even know what it was. I just said, well, I don't know what that plant is. It's really neat. It's always got something going on. Right? It's evergreen. It's got nice little flowers in the springtime, nice red berries in the fall and the winter. There's always birds and butterflies, and it's always pretty looking. And then we got hit by a hurricane. I don't remember which one, so many. And there was a lot of saltwater intrusion in that hammock. It's like a hardwood hammock near the ocean. And a lot of stuff died, because it got hit with the saltwater and it just turned brown. Except for this stuff. It was just sticking out green everywhere. And I'm like, what the hell is that plant? Because nothing harms it. It's just so resilient. So I found out that it was Yaupon. And I went down a rabbit hole with the plant, and I stumbled on this book that is called The Black Drink. It was written by an anthropologist from the University of Georgia named Charles Hudson. And I got the book, and I started skimming through it. It's like this very dry academic read. And I started learning about the 8,000+ years of history about this plant and how indigenous cultures did all kinds of things with it. They used it as a medicine. They used it as a tea, as like an energizing beverage, and they also used it as a sacrament. It was literally sacred to dozens and dozens of indigenous cultures, and I don't use that word lightly. It's the truth. So I was just like totally floored by this. Like this is. Of course, I left out that it's the only native caffeinated plant species in North America, and I'm like, this stuff must taste like shit, or somebody would have done something with it.
And this was growing in your backyard?
Yeah, it was growing in my backyard, literally just wild in my backyard, essentially. I mean, it was like a little bit across the street, but yeah, it was just there, naturally. And I just couldn't believe that there was no commercially available anything made from Yaupon, and there wasn't. This is back in 2012.
So you just started Googling Yaupon?
Yeah.
And
there was nothing. There was nothing. In 2012, you could not buy a Yaupon product anywhere.
That's surprising because caffeine is such a premium commodity all over the world.
Yeah. But for some reason, Yaupon's, even with this elaborate history spanning back millennia, just was not, there was no products from it. And so I just surmised to believe that it must not taste good, or there must be a reason why, like some sort of legitimate reason why this has never been commercialized or commoditized. And I found some videos on YouTube of people making tea from it, just all sorts of different ways. So I experimented with some of those methods, and I forced it on everybody I know, basically, and everybody liked it. Everybody thought it tasted like tea or tasted good, and I was like, this is going to make me rich immediately. And that did not happen, but it started this really cool journey that I've now been on for more than 12 years, building a supply chain around this plant, and I wrote my brother into the business very early on, so that's hence the name Yaupon Brothers. He's a co-founder with me, and yeah, it's on its way. It's happening.
Wow, so your curiosity for native plant in your eco region set you forth on this entrepreneurial journey, and now you're a full-fledged startup founder, entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And all because of a plant.
All because of a plant. And actually, so our product, our first company was called Yaupon Aussie Tea. Aussie is one of the indigenous names for Yaupon. It's the Creek or Muskogee label for it. And we were the first product to market in over 100 years. It has been commercially available in the past. But coincidentally, there were other entrepreneurs working on Yaupon products at the same time. So really, like, 3 of us came out the gate right around the same time. But those were the first products that had been available in more than a century. At one point, the precursor to the FDA, which was the USDA chemistry department, did attempt to commercialize Yaupon back in the 1920s, but it just never caught on for some reason. Mm-hmm. So there's been attempts at it before.
It was a little bit marginalized in society because it was viewed as the poor man's tea, but
yeah,
before the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't know anything about these issues when I started doing this, but as I've gone through the motions, I've had to learn a lot about indigenous issues primarily, and especially as myself not being an indigenous person, I want to tell the story of this plant in a way that it pays reverence to its past as truthfully as I can, you know. So as I learn, I try to make an effort to really be truthful with the story of Yaupon. And with that said, the primary reason why Yaupon went away was because of the erasure of indigenous culture in America. Like, that's the reason. That's the big reason. And then also it did become sort of déclassé. It was viewed as a poor person's drink, as like a peasant beverage, and it wasn't fashionable. So there's a lot of reasons why it went away, but those are the 2 big ones. Mm-hmm. It's mostly just really stupid cultural reasons. Nothing about the quality of the product or the good things it does for your body and your mental health. None of that is a factor.
Yeah, it's a fabulous drink. It tastes superb. It's very highly caffeinated. At least I find it so. It gives you a good kick.
Yeah.
And it's native, as you were pointing out, the only caffeinated plant native to North America. So you can grow it here.
Yeah, easy. Because it loves to grow here.
Right? They don't grow coffee or Asian teas in the US.
So there are some like really small scale, almost artisanal level of production for tea and coffee in some tropical parts of America, but it's just very tiny. You know, it's mainly like hobbyist or really small scale production. So by and large, all of the caffeinated products that we're consuming in America are from either an imported source or a synthetic source. And like the market case that I usually use is that with tea specifically, just because coffee is a whole horse of a different color, but just for ease of argument, talk about tea, which is Camellia sinensis, which is originally from China. It's now grown all around the world. But there's very few suitable places in the United States to grow tea, so we're importing most of it. We're importing between 250 to 300,000 tons a year. On average, we're moving that material 7,000 miles to get here. It ends up in the cupboard of roughly 90 million American households, and 75% of those consumers say that they want locally produced food. But for tea and coffee and other caffeinated products, they don't have an option for that except for Yaupon.
Except for Yaupon.
Yeah.
Because these Chinese teas, so that would be like your English breakfast tea, your gray, your black, your...
Yep. Yep. So Camellia sinensis originated in China. That's where it is native to. It's now grown all over, and it has been cultivated by humans for more than 4,000 years. So it has sort of proliferated throughout the suitable growing regions of the world. And actually, I think in America we have a predisposition of considering Chinese goods to be like low quality or substandard. It's not really the truth for tea. Like actually Chinese tea tends to be pretty relatively high quality. And most of the tea that we have in America that we consume is of shitty quality, and it's not really from China. It's mostly from India, Bangladesh, and East Africa.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of our tea comes from. Countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, they're producing more of the high-end teas. I mean, they produce other types as well, but if we had to really get it into a nutshell.
So one of the big business cases for your product is that it's locally grown.
Yeah.
And it's more of a sustainable supply chain.
Exactly. Sustainable, transparent, and it's like the sustainability element for me, like the big one is, okay, yes, it's a native plant. It's not as resource intensive, doesn't require as many inputs as non-native like monocultures might. But also with tea, we're moving that material, a tremendous quantity of material, 7,000 miles to get here. It's coming across an ocean. And with Yaupon, we cut out that whole step. So it's much more sustainable in that regard. So yeah, and I also think like in the food system in America, there's globally, but especially in America, at the consumer level, there's an awful lot of mistrust. And some of that stems from bad action. There's a lot of bad actors in the food supply chain.
You mean like greenwashing and just overstating?
Yeah, just all
labels?
of it. I mean, we allow pretty like not good for you crap to be in our food that's fillers and cheap junk, and I think consumers have gotten wary of that and also skeptical of labeling, of provenance. Like they don't know where the food comes from, they're weary about it, they don't want to give it to their kids without knowing more about what's in it. And with Yaupon specifically, I'm not saying give caffeine to your kids, but what I'm saying is for consumers, you can just see how it's made. It's here. It's the supply chain is pretty transparent. You can come onto a farm or walk through a wild harvest area and you can see it. So helps the credibility along when you can see it happening.
So how do you tell that story to consumers if the consumer is naturally skeptical of the marketing and the labeling?
I usually start by asking them, okay, do you consume tea? And when they say yes, I say, do you know where your tea comes from? And most of the time the answer is no. They don't know. They go to Publix and they buy some crap on the shelf and they don't know where it comes from. And not only do they not know where it comes from most of the time, but they're also like unaware of what tea actually is. I would say the average American consumer doesn't even know that tea is a specific kind of plant. Like Camellia sinensis is the tea plant. I don't think consumers think about it that way most of the time. They think about leafy stuff infused in water is tea. Whatever the leafy stuff is not that important.
People don't spend a lot of time thinking about supply chains and about farming.
Absolutely they don't. Yeah, they don't. For sure.
Is that your strategy, is to speak to a consumer who's interested in hearing about regenerative, locally farmed, locally sourced tea? Is that appealing?
It depends on the segment that I'm working in. So like if I'm in a natural grocer, for example, I know that those consumers are more likely to care about things like that. The organic, regenerative, is it safe? Are there no chemicals in it? Those are the things they want to know. And also the sustainability aspect too. If I'm at an event where it's more of a generic audience or something, it might just be more about the origin statement. That there is no tea from here. Most consumers, most Americans in general, they want things to be made here, produced here, grown here.
Yeah.
They want to build industry. They want a vibrant economy. And so I usually hit with that.
American made.
Yeah, it's American. Well, this doesn't say that, but I have a shirt that says it's American tea. That's all it says.
Yeah.
I have another shirt that says WTF is Yaupon. And that's
WTF?
Yeah. And it's and that's like a really good one because I get stopped. I mean, I was in the airport with that shirt on last week and I had like 4 people stop me in the airport to ask me what Yaupon was.
Yeah.
Just because of that shirt. So there is a huge barrier to educating people right? Like it's very expensive, it's very time consuming. Pretty much every customer has to be educated. But it's much better now than it was 10 years ago.
Right.
You know, so it's like time moves the needle. Even
So what's the growth been like for your business since you started?
Yeah. Well, when I started, I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't go to business school. I really didn't know what I was doing at all. And so I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. And one of the assumptions that I made that was totally incorrect was that it was going to be easy to source a huge quantity of Yaupon. And it wasn't easy at all. It was ridiculously difficult. And because, you know, there's a lot of Yaupon out there, it's everywhere.
In the wild.
In the wild. But getting Yaupon from the wild presents a lot of challenges. You know, it's very inconsistent product, it's tedious, it's labor intensive, it's expensive. There's all kinds of logistical problems with doing that. It doesn't really make for a scalable supply chain.
So you were harvesting Yaupon leaves out of the wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is very labor intensive, although it's probably a lot of fun.
It's not fun.
No?
I don't think it's fun. I think
Hiking
it's
through the woods?
really, when it's like 95 degrees out like this and you're going through the woods and saw palmettos are like scratching your skin and bugs are eating you.
Not fun.
It's not fun for me. But I did it for a long time. Now we still source some of our product from the wild, even now. Like I feel like we're in a transitional period. We're transitioning to agriculture.
Yeah.
But we manage a lot of wild Yaupon as a non-timber forestry product. So it's a renewable resource. We don't chop the trees down. We harvest from them. We cut them back. Yaupon responds very well to pruning like that. And within 8 days, we see new growth on the trees.
So do you guys have some sort of access, easement, or concession to work on public lands, or how do you?
Yeah, we have over 80,000 acres under management. So we don't use even close to all of it. Some of it we own, very small amount. Some of it we lease. And a lot of it, we just have harvesting rights through some sort of contractual relationship.
That's great. So like ranches and things like that?
Ranches, public lands, private lands that are, you know, conservation easements or whatever. There's no downside ecologically to harvesting the Yaupon. It's so abundant and aggressive in the way that it grows that it's actually okay to thin it out every now and then, and it responds well to that.
Does it grow everywhere in the state of Florida?
It can grow everywhere in the state of Florida. It's native to pretty much everywhere north of Lake Okeechobee. Yeah. But it'll grow in South Florida too. If you plant it. It just for some reason doesn't occur down there in the wild. It doesn't, there are areas where it is much more common than other areas. Like it does prefer a coastal situation most of the time.
So wild harvesting is hiking through thickets and forests and picking leaves and pruning branches off of Yaupon trees.
Yeah.
And carrying them back in a sack.
Yep. And a lot of the areas where we do harvest, we bust out the invasive flora as well. So our harvesters are not only in there harvesting Yaupon, but they're also cutting back all the Brazilian pepper, for instance. So in a lot of these municipal, like say a city-owned land, that's what they're getting in exchange, is that we're helping them control invasive plant life. Yeah, and especially in our areas, it's good for them because we're certified organic, and we have to certify those lands. They have to be inspected by the USDA or a third party that's related to the USDA, which means we can't use herbicides on those lands. So we're not killing the Brazilian pepper. It's going to come back.
You're just chopping it.
We're chopping it down and controlling its spread. And when we chop it down, like when it's flowering, well, now you just ruin the crop of berries. You know, it's not going to put out a crop of berries when you cut all that down before it fruits. So there are ways to control it, limit its spread without using herbicide.
But that sounds incredibly expensive as a means of harvesting Yaupon leaves for tea production.
It is incredibly expensive. And that's really was the impetus to try to transition into agriculture. That and also the citrus greening crisis, you know, and like we grew up in Florida and it's a changed place, you know, it's like you smell orange blossoms in the springtime in so many places, you can't do that anymore. So a concept that we had was, well, maybe Yaupon could be a native alternative crop for a citrus grower or someone else that doesn't want to like just walk away from that way of life, you know, maybe they could have something else. The way that it's worked out is that most of the farmers who are growing Yaupon are actually not citrus growers. They're more conventional farmers, or growing things like blueberries, for instance. That's just the way it worked out.
And these are farmers that you've kind of set up and put into production, or they were already growing Yaupon?
No, we set them up and put them into production. So we propagate our trees, we supply the trees to farmers on a contract basis.
Okay.
So they're growing the trees for us, and then we're coming back a few years later and purchasing back all the output at a preset price. So they know exactly what they're going to get paid up front. All they have to worry about is the yield.
And you can get, like, I saw 2,000 pounds. Was it 2,000 pounds?
Yeah, roughly. Acre? Like when a tree matures, a pound a tree per harvest is about what you can expect to get.
Okay.
Not the first time. You get about 11 ounces or so total. But after 3 or 4 years, after 1 or 2 harvests, pound a tree. Yeah.
And you guys are working with AgriStarts to produce the liners?
Yeah, correct. We have 2 cultivars in AgriStarts that are in tissue culture production. Yeah.
And how did you guys select those cultivars?
They're coastal varieties, so they both were growing in the area where I first found the Yaupon, so New Smyrna. And there is something different about a lot of those trees that I think, I don't know if it's serendipity or what, but just like the leaf structure tends to be so much larger, and it's not just the shade, it's not just the fact that they grow in an understory, because we've gotten them to maintain a relatively large leaf size even in full sun. And we wanted all male trees, so that was a factor as well. We didn't want to process out the berries. A lot of the commercially available Yaupon trees are females because people want the berries for like ornamental purposes, and we didn't want them. So we have all male trees. They grow faster, they grow larger, they have tighter node spacing, so more leaf production, larger leaf size. And then just in general, we see them growing 2 to 3 times faster than what else is commercially available.
Yeah, that sounds like a great selection. And you found that through nursery crops, or?
No, they were wild. So it's like a haplotype, like a wild genetic thing, where the trees were just better in a certain area. And we started off with 5 selections, and we winnowed it down to 2. So now we have 2 that are in production, and they're called Patano and Agua Dulce.
Are those available to the ornamental trade?
We've thought about it. I don't think I have a objection to it, but we haven't really done anything down that path yet.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you're interested, because we're looking for more Yaupon selections, and I think a male is appropriate because there's situations like around apartment buildings and other more urban spaces where the berries are a nuisance because they can stain and they can create some maintenance issues. So
sure.
In some cases you want the females, of course, for the show and for the birds, but a fast-growing, vigorous tree that has tight nodes and large leaves, that's usually very attractive for ornamentals because it gives you fullness, and the economics are good because your growth rates are faster.
That's what we're going for. And then also, we took some things out of like the yerba mate playbook, because yerba mate and Yaupon are related. And in Argentina, for instance, when they harvest the yerba mate, they wait for a real big lateral to shoot up. So they like cut it way back, and then these really long, thin branches come up, and they call them banderas, so they're flags. And we kind of figured out that the Yaupon does the same thing. So we're shooting for that sort of growth, where it shoots up really tall laterals, because the process of removing the leaves is a mechanized process. It didn't start out that way, but now it is. And our machine works much better with like a 3 to 4 foot section of branch. And if you were just indiscriminately, cut little pieces off and feed them in, that makes for kind of a mess. But
this machine for removing the leaves, was that adapted from a different harvesting for a different crop?
It's originally for the hemp trade.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a debuckler, I believe is what it's called, and it does remove the leaves from hemp. And we just did some modifications, and it works very well for Yaupon as well.
Okay. So after harvesting in the wild at the beginning, you started putting in place some production supply chains with these farmers?
Yeah. So back to that. So yes, we learned that the supply chain had a lot of inherent challenges, right? It was not there, number one. Like we had to build it from nothing.
Right.
And then realizing that doing that from the wild also presented some really big challenges, right? Especially in Florida. So I feel like if you're in a place like Texas, it might be easier because you can basically just mow it down. It's so prolific on the ranch land out there. It's native, but it has invasive qualities, and it's sort of a nuisance. So they mow it down. I think there's still very inefficient processes associated with that, and a lot of inconsistency in the quality of the product.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Seasonal variations, things you can't control. Yeah. And so we decided to invest in the ag side of the business, and it took a long time to get to the point where we felt like we had something we could scale. So in the last 2 to 3 years, we've felt like, okay, now it's time to scale the business, it's time to raise money, it's time to get a product out on the market, like in a big way. And that's sort of the phase that we're in now.
Okay.
Like
so you've set up a supply chain, at least a foundation, to grow the supply, and now you're going after the market, and for that you need capital.
Yep.
What's kind of the vision though? Like how far did this go?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I felt like I used to have a stronger vision for that before I knew more. Now that I know more, I'm like, actually I know less. But I do feel like, okay, if we were to say Yaupon, maybe not even just our Yaupon, just all Yaupon, were to capture 1% of the American tea market, we got to produce 5 million pounds of leaves a year. And think about the
1% of the tea market
in America. Yeah.
Does Yaupon compete with coffee?
It can. I mean, I feel like for some reason a lot of consumers feel like they can only consume coffee or tea for some reason. And I always they're like, oh, sorry, I only drink coffee. And I'm like, well, you can still drink coffee. You don't have to quit. It's like I drink coffee and I like getting punched in the face with like a really high dose of caffeine first thing in the morning, and I have a cup of coffee, or maybe even more than one cup of coffee. It's totally fine. The way that the alkaloids, caffeine, theobromine, theophylline, occur in Yaupon is different than the way they occur in coffee, than the way they occur in tea. And the result is that Yaupon is very gentle. It's like a very mellow, ethereal buzz that you can sort of maintain throughout the day, and you don't get jittery, and you don't get crashes. I mean, I like coffee. I don't want to drink coffee all day long. I feel like it just comes through my pores and makes me feel weird and, crazy. And Yaupon will not do that.
Just a smoother release curve.
So you could drink coffee in the morning, you could continue drinking Yaupon throughout the day and not suffer some of the adverse effects of drinking too much coffee. And of course, everybody's different. Everybody has a different caffeine sensitivity or tolerance. I talk about that all day, but...
So 1% of the American tea market is 5 million pounds of Yaupon?
Approximately, yeah.
And what's that in dollars? What's the size of the American tea market?
Well, I mean, I think that depends a lot on the form factor of the end product. So if you were just selling Yaupon as like a bulk ingredient, that's a much lower price point at...
But the consumer goods?
Let's say it's between $100 and $130 million a year.
For 1%?
Yeah.
So it's a business that can really scale. There's a good value proposition. It's sourced local, sustainable supply chain, American grown. It's caffeine, which everybody's addicted to caffeine, let's face it.
Yeah.
And there aren't that many alternatives between, well, you can drink your coffee in all kinds of different forms, and you can drink tea from China.
Yeah.
So I like it. I think it's super exciting what you're doing, and the way you're telling the story is really inspiring, because I follow you on LinkedIn and I've listened to some of your podcasts, and I really appreciate the way that you tell the story.
Thank you.
And make it about more than just a product or more than just a business. It's, there's a holistic approach to social ethics, to environmental conservation and sustainability, and sustainable supply webs. I'm really passionate about those things, and in our business we also try to approach things more holistically, to see about how we can really create value. So I tip my hat to you, Bryon.
Likewise. Yeah, we're in it together.
Yeah. So the challenges of scaling the supply chain is one thing. What about the distribution space? Are you selling to retailers? What stores are you in?
Yeah, so we're primarily focused on increasing our retail footprint right now. So that's sort of the phase that we're in. That's the capital allocation. So like we're raising capital specifically so we can expand our retail footprint. And like right now we're in all Whole Foods stores in the state of Florida, working to expand that. We're in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast states. We're in Mom's Organic Markets. We're in a chain in Southern California called Lassen's. A lot of regional mid-sized chains, in total about 500 retailers or so. And then about 30% of our business is direct consumer. So our own website, Amazon, things like that.
What do you think how is that going to grow? Is it mostly going to be through retail distribution, or do you see that direct-to-consumer segment being an important part of the business in the future?
I think direct-to-consumer is always going to be important, but our primary focus is on expanding retail right now. And I think direct-to-consumer is great for like building customer loyalty, for just accessing people who you can't access in a retail location, at least at the time. But there's so much noise in the digital marketing space right now that I think it's gotten very difficult to scale direct consumer businesses. Mm-hmm. It's like everything post-COVID has gotten so much harder. You know?
Really?
Yeah, it's really hard, at least for us. I can only speak from my own perspective, but it's been really hard to understand things like return on ad spend, you know, with our product specifically, whereas we've seen a much easier path to scalability through expanding our retail presence.
So retailers have such a big distribution footprint.
Right.
And especially if you get into some of the larger ones, a single distribution center, you know, it's nonlinear growth, because when they award you a program for a distribution center or a market, it's a big jump in growth.
It's a big jump. I mean, we're distributed nationally through KeHE, and that just means any natural grocer in America can pull our products from their catalog.
Okay.
So that makes it so much easier for them to say yes. You know, when we're in a sales situation and we speak to a buyer, it's easy for them to say yes because they have the ability to pull our products in from where they're already getting all their products. So removing that barrier, I think, is critically important. Getting that distribution step solved is really important. Now, I mean, the business is hard, right? There's all kinds of fees and chargebacks and crazy things that you don't expect, and that can really like eat your lunch on occasion.
I'll squeeze you.
Yeah. So it's not super fun like dealing with all of that stuff, but everything has that. So I think we definitely do consider ourselves to be an omni-channel business. Like we go wherever the opportunities are. We don't say we're not doing D2C anymore, we're focusing only on this, because things do change, like things are in flux. You know, during COVID, we shifted almost completely to D2C because all of our retailers shut down, and that was how we had to survive. So I think you have to be agile and be able to pivot very quickly in order to just make it, and it's gotten very hard.
Yeah, it's not easy surviving in business, especially with the amount of dynamic change in the economy and society. And COVID, that's a black swan event.
Oh, I know.
And who knows what's next, but
crazy.
Something's coming and you have to pivot, like you say.
Yeah.
But what's the status of your supply chain? Are you able to scale quickly now? Can you add distribution markets?
Yeah, we're ready to go. I mean, we're producing right now about 50,000 pounds of Yaupon leaves a year, and we have much greater capacity than that. That's just sort of where we are. So now we find ourselves in a position of, okay, well, you know, we went from not having enough Yaupon to having enough. And so now we're ready. Like, we built the car, we built the engine, now we need to put gas in the tank. And that's sort of the stage that we're in.
So what's the gas?
The gas is money. I mean, the gas is capital. And it's very hard to raise capital right now. It's just really hard. The market is pretty dry. Especially for consumer goods. So
where can you go, and what are your sources for a capital raise?
Well, for an SMB like us, like a small business, venture capital is pretty much out. They are largely exited from consumer goods, from CPG. There's still some, but not anything like it was. So our main sources of capital are angel investors, family offices, crowdfunding. We've crowdfunded a couple $100,000 mainly from our own customers, which is a great development. I mean, that used to not be an option for entrepreneurs, and now it is. And I think crowdfunding is a really powerful tool that's going to get even more important as we go along. Yeah.
So how does the valuation work in that situation? Like if you're going to angel investors and crowdfunding, do you set the valuation, or how is that determined?
Yeah, I mean, I think at our stage, businesses should be trying to avoid a valuation event. It's not a good time to be valued, right? And it's extremely arbitrary, and it's just set by the market, you know? So whatever somebody's willing to pay you for the equity in your business is what the value is. One way that venture capitalists and institutional investors like to value your business is through a multiplier of revenue. So they look at your revenue, and depending on what other deals are being done at the time, they'll look at comps and they'll say, well, we'll give you, 2x, 3x, whatever. And every type of industry has a different multiplier. Like if you're looking at a tech or an AI, like anything that has AI on the end of it right now, like venture capitalists
10x.
fall all over themselves to put, even if it's a stupid idea with no future, like the VCs want to get in just so they can cash out before, they don't care if it ever becomes anything or not. I mean, of course, they'll hate to hear that, but that's what I see. So food businesses traditionally have very low multipliers of revenue.
Right.
Like food businesses, consumer packaged goods, those types of businesses are expensive to stand up. They yield lower returns for investors, and it takes longer to realize success.
Yeah, it's a slow burn. You definitely have a long establishment because you're farming.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Farming takes time. How long does it take to harvest the first crop on a Yaupon planting?
Between 2 and 3 years.
Okay, so there's that, and then it probably doesn't get to peak yield until 5, 6?
Yeah, it's sometime after you've harvested it once or twice, and the tree is responding and growing back in a way that you can realize those larger yields. Because when you've harvested the first time, it's going to look kind of like this, inefficient structure. You pull all these little branches and things get in the way. The idea is you cut it back and it sends up those long laterals,
right.
and that is much more efficient.
So it takes time to build up the yields, and then I suppose on the processing side, you must need a lot of capital to put in place the automations and mechanization that's needed to process this tea.
And the good thing for us is that we've already done a lot of that. So we have raised some money, and a lot of that money has gone into the operations, so the farming, the manufacturing. Like our business, for instance, is fully vertically integrated. So we do all of our own manufacturing, all of our own raw material, everything is done in-house. So we built all of that already. It's already there. So now new capital is all for growth. It's all for scale. It's not for payroll. It's not for overhead. It's not for physical plants or equipment, really. It's mainly for sales, marketing, growth.
So you need capital for sales, marketing, growth. So is that putting business developers out there going to call on retailers, or is that buying ads on AdWords?
No, fortunately, it's mostly me. Just going out there and hitting people up for money. And right now, so I'm using what's called a safe note. A lot of people have still not heard of safe notes, especially outside of like New York and the Bay Area where they've started, and they're very common now. But a safe note is a simple agreement for future equity. So we talked about it earlier, it avoids evaluation because it is not equity right now, it is equity in the future, and it converts to equity at the next valuation event. The incentive for the investor is that when it does convert, which for us probably will be very soon because we're about to start a price round, and when you sell equity, the second you sell equity in our case, all those safe notes convert.
They cash in.
They cash in, and they cash in at a face discount. So the people who put money in at the safe are getting a 15% discount over what the institutional investors are paying, and they're also getting what's called a valuation cap. So let's say we do a deal with a venture capital fund or a private equity or family office or something, and they want to come in and buy priced equity, and they want to give us a really high valuation. Unlikely, but could happen. And let's say they want to give us a $20 million valuation. Well, the people on the safe, their equity is going to convert at the cap of $7.5 million. So they're getting a way better deal than the $20 million people. So that's their incentive for getting in early. On the bottom floor, they're shouldering the most risk. So it's recognizing the risk associated with this type of investment. But the great thing about a safe note is that the only requirement is that an investor be quote unquote accredited. So essentially what that means is our minimum is $25,000. Right? Somebody can give us a $25,000 check, wire us some money, and we sign the safe. It's 4 pages, no lawyers, no anything, and we're done. You're on the cap table, you're good. Now, the only requirement is that that money can be provided by the investor and it doesn't hurt them. You know, it's like they can afford to lose it. It's like, it's a gamble, it's a risk. So they have to have sufficient amount of savings or cash on hand to where if, let's say, for example, they put $25,000, they put $50,000.
They could lose it.
They can lose it, and it doesn't harm their way of life.
Are they getting paid a low interest on the note until it converts?
There's no interest. It's not debt.
Okay.
It's simply a contract that converts to equity at a valuation event.
So what are the statistics on startups? I'm sure you're aware most of them don't pan out, right?
90% fail within 5 years, I think. Don't quote me on that. But it's like a really high number like that. Yeah.
So you've passed that first bar.
I know.
That's great.
Yeah. It is risky. It feels like it's never ending. You know. Yeah. Because what we're trying to do is so crazy, in a good way, crazy. Like, it's not just a business; it's an industry. And it's like we're trying to build an industry. And so we've done really weird things. Like we've helped other Yaupon producers come online.
Right.
Because we know that it can't just be us. Like there's no possibility of that ever working. It's not
You need strong competition to be successful.
And we need people to fill niches that we don't want to fill or can't fill. So like for instance, we decided pretty early on that we really don't want to be a bulk ingredient supplier. We don't want to realize that lower margin. We do have a hard time occasionally getting enough Yaupon to put into our own products. You know, like we're selling a good amount of product. And we make a much higher margin when we sell products to consumers in a finished unit.
Yeah, value add.
Yeah, value-added product. So we don't really want to sell 100 pounds, 1,000 pounds of raw material to another tea company so that they can do the same thing. However, there are now Yaupon producers that very much want that sort of business.
Are they in Texas or?
Yeah, they're mostly in Texas, and a lot of them we either help stand up or we work with very closely in the nonprofit business league, which is called the American Yaupon Association that we co-founded. So we really want more producers because our thought process is that we're not competing against other Yaupon producers. We're competing against tea.
Tea and coffee. I could really empathize with that because we're focusing on building an industry for sustainable landscapes in Florida.
Yeah,
and
so important.
It's very important, and our competition is conventional landscaping. That's turf dominant and doesn't use a lot of native plants. So we find ourselves in the same situation, wanting to build an industry, which means propping up would-be competitors, sharing our knowledge, being really transparent. In fact, I had Massey Services coming out here, and we've spent 4 hours with their leadership team, just sharing what we've learned because they want to see, you know, how this shift in the industry paradigm is going to potentially create opportunities for their business, and I think that's great.
I think it's great too.
I think it's great because we need to have a whole ecosystem, an industry of people who are really learning about native plant landscaping, sustainable landscaping, water management, and providing competitive services throughout the state to realize the vision. So I guess I have some appreciation for what you're doing on the Yaupon side.
Likewise for you. I mean, it's so important, right? Like, and I mean, we were discussing earlier how anything a conventional non-native plant on an ornamental landscape can do, there's a native plant that can do the same thing.
Yeah, and can survive the drought. I mean, we're standing sitting in this garden here.
It's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, but when was the last time it rained?
I mean, forever ago.
Forever ago, and,
Forever
and it's
ago.
100 degrees out.
It's literally 100 degrees out.
And the plants are just fine.
They look great. They're verdant. It's like Garden of Eden in here.
Yeah, you've got pollinators.
Yeah.
It smells good because, as we were talking about earlier, we have some really fragrant plants.
Is it Salvia miscela?
Salvia miscela.
I smell that.
Yep. We
Yep.
have the showstopper. That's not a native, but we have the aloysia, the sweet almond.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
familiar
see
with
it
that
over
one?
there. Yeah.
Oh, it
Gorgeous.
smells so good. It smells like a French pastry, like a croissant aux amandes or something like this.
It does sound nice.
I got blueberries right there. If we get hungry,
And they have blueberries on them.
they have blueberries.
Yeah.
It's fascinating what you can do with native plants, and I consider myself a native plant entrepreneur.
You are for
I
sure.
am. I think so. I think you are.
Yeah.
And it's a thing, right? It's a class of businesses that are, trying to make good use of the resources, the natural resources that are occurring around us,
Yeah.
so that we don't have to import our products. We don't have to import these resources to grow the business, because that fundamentally reduces so much waste.
Right.
When you talk about transportation and supply chains and the cost of freight, most supply chains are carrying a very, very heavy burden on transportation cost, because they're bringing their products from all over the world, like you were describing with the tea market.
Yeah.
So when you kind of cut that out, because you're growing local to where you're distributing it, you can really reduce the cost to the consumer. So at the end of the day, I think that you want people to think in terms of locally grown, locally sourced,
Yeah.
food miles, because that hopefully is purposeful, and it's consumer choices that can move the needle,
Yes.
right, for our
Yeah.
sustainable future. But you can get them with cost. You
That's
can
right.
get them just by providing a better product at a lower cost structure, because your supply chain is local, and you just cut out that freight.
Well, not to mention you have like an evolutionary one-up. It's like these plants have evolved to thrive in this sort of environment. These
They have.
native plants. So, I mean, planting a native plant is a posterity move. It's like you're putting something here that's supposed to be here. It wants to be here,
Yeah.
and ergo, it's going to require fewer resources from you
Right.
in order to thrive.
That's right.
And that's just common sense, really, when you get down to it.
It's profound, though, because now you're cutting out a whole other category of cost
Right.
in
Yes.
your landscape in this case, because it's going to be more regenerative and self-sustaining. It'll thrive with the natural rainfall, the natural nutrients available in the soils.
Yeah.
And so you're not fertilizing as much, you're not paying for as much water. If you design it right, you might not be pruning or mowing as much.
Yep.
So those costs start to disappear.
That's right.
And what I'm hoping is that, as we scale this, we can show our clients, whether it be homeowners, home builders, developers, cities, whomever, we can show them that not only is this better for natural resource management, but it's much less expensive over the life cycle of the landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a big freeze come in, and it knocks out half of your landscape.
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen with most native varieties, especially if you are intentional about the way that you select what you're
Right.
planting.
Yeah, you want to design for your environment.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we look for is resilience to these setbacks that can be very costly.
Yeah. It's part of life.
Yeah.
It happens.
It happens. I think people are catching on. People are really interested in living, I think, a more healthy, wholesome, and harmonious lifestyle
Yeah.
with a greater connection to nature.
I agree.
And it's possible that people, while they may want that, they may be struggling to figure out how to do it. Like,
Yeah.
what are the options? And entrepreneurs like you are making options available to people that they can start to choose. This product is locally grown. It's a native plant business that is, taking
Yep.
care of the earth, taking care of its workers.
It's a really interesting point, too, because I think in the same vein, like one of the things we always wanted to do with Yaupon Brothers was to create a sense of place with our products, in the sense of, okay, we started in New Smyrna Beach. I'm from there, my brother's from there, and we really wanted people to think about New Smyrna Beach when they saw our products, like to identify and connect with a place from that. And I think that is a powerful tool for building a brand or a business. And for something like what you're doing, it's very similar because these plants are part of this place. Like native plants are Florida in this state. We have very unusual, fascinating, beautiful, endless selections of things to choose from.
Very unique here.
Yeah, it's very unique and very ancient and special. And I think like that should be highlighted because I feel like in this state, so many places that are here are trying to look like somewhere else. And I'm like, why don't you try to make it look like Florida? Like let's put things that are supposed to be here that are a representation of our home in the way that it's nature intended it to be. Can be beautiful, can be formal, can be a showcase, can be everything that everybody wants their yard or their landscape or their garden or the median and the highway, whatever, to look like. Can be done with native plants and should be.
I think it's going to happen inevitably because of the water resource issues in Florida, and we just need to build the knowledge. I've been focusing on learning from others. I spent a lot of time with Mark Gotts.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
Spent a lot of time with Brightman Logan recently, and I'm learning from Jimmy and these other native plant enthusiasts, because we need to build the knowledge of how to design and maintain and create these beautiful places with Florida native plants.
Yeah.
It is possible, and once we are able to do it with some scale and replicate that, I do think it could spread, and I do see it as being the predominant form of landscaping in Florida in the future.
It might be forced on us, like you were saying. It's like things are changing. It's 100 degrees and it's barely June and there's no rainfall, and it's going to force changes, and in this case they could be positive changes.
They can. Yeah, I think we have to find a way to introduce positive change, because otherwise it's just too damn depressing.
Yeah, it is.
We're up against a lot of trouble, and these are tough times. So what can I do to move the needle, to make choices? I think that's something that you say on your LinkedIn page, which I really love, that you want to make the world a better place through the choices we make as consumers, businesses, and individuals.
Yeah, everybody, right? It's like if you're in the grocery store and you're buying a product, I think values-based buying is a huge thing right now, and it's only going to get bigger. Like consumers have caught on that when they buy something, they're making a choice. They're almost like voting with their credit card. And so many consumers are aware of that now. And they really want to believe in the products that they're buying, that they're not, at least not bad for them or for the planet. And if they can believe that the product they're buying is a good thing for society, for them, for the environment, they're willing to pay a little more for it, to put it in their cart more often, more frequently. That values-based buying is really important. And then it comes down to actually doing the things that you said you were going to do.
You have to be really accountable as a business,
right,
to honor that commitment and that promise if you want to keep the consumer loyalty over time.
Exactly. Because you don't have anything to hide. It's harder to be authentic and to really own up to what you claim to want to accomplish. But when you do that, or you at least do your damnedest to make it happen, people notice. They notice, and they get behind you and they support you, and I think that's a huge part of it, right? Like just setting a tone, like this is what our business wants to accomplish aside from making money. It's like all businesses want to make money. All businesses have to make money in order to survive. But there's more that a business can do for its employees, for its shareholders, for the environment, for the communities that they operate in. And I just think that we should.
We absolutely should.
Yeah.
And I think that authenticity and transparency will carry the day. I think that it will shine through. There's a lot of shysters out there, and there are a lot of unethical businesses. There's a lot of predatory business practices, unfortunately. But a lot of that is kind of part of an older paradigm of organizations that I think are, they're slowly dying out.
I agree.
There is a transition to a new form of business leadership.
Yeah.
That's based on purpose, on the triple bottom line, if you want to call it that, on values and wholeness.
Yep.
And I see that in your business. That's what we try to embrace in our business. So yes, every business needs to make money. There's no shame in that.
No.
But that can't be the sole reason for your being here.
That's no fun.
No, it's not. So what are the things that you add to that equation when you think about what Yaupon Brothers' purpose is?
Oh boy, man, there's so much that I want to accomplish, but we're big into native food rematriation. So like much of what you're working to accomplish here with creating more of an industry presence for native plant species, we're trying to do that with native foods. And there's a lot of cultural things going on around indigenous issues right now, and I feel very strongly about that, but as a business we're focused on it more from an ecological perspective and a sustainability perspective. And the way that I usually tell this story is before European contact in Florida, just using Florida as an example, just for the sake of argument, there were probably between 700,000 and 1 million indigenous people living on this peninsula. And they had been here for plus or minus 8,000 years, right? That's how long they were here, 8,000 years. Long time, way longer than we've been here. And on average, these native people were a foot taller than their Spanish counterparts. Like they were not unhealthy, they were robust, thriving.
Oh yeah, they frightened a lot of these conquistadors.
Yeah, and they should have been frightened of them, right? But they were not really agricultural people. They were more on the hunter-gatherer spectrum, and they were being completely sustained off of a native food system.
Yeah, they were living off the estuaries and and then the native food sources.
They were living off the land.
Yeah,
and I want to look at the ways they accomplished that amazing feat and think about how can we create products from these indigenous sources, right, whether plant, animal, you name it, that are actually good, that consumers actually want to buy. Because I guarantee you that process of producing those products tail to nose is going to be orders of magnitude more sustainable, even cheaper possibly, than what we do now. The food system in America is really bogus. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's like totally stupid. And I get
broken.
It's totally broken and stupid and favors a very few amount of people and screws over most of everyone else, including the consumers, by the way.
Yeah.
But so I'm really into that. Native food rematriation is huge.
Rematriation?
Yeah, we call it rematriation because most of the indigenous cultures that existed not just in the Southeast but in America were actually matriarchal societies. So for us to say repatriation would actually be inaccurate because it doesn't reflect the cultural heritage of these types of plants, that we want to re-commercialize. And I say that we want to do it in a responsible way, obviously. So there's that part of it. There's also the social aspect of our business. What can we do? And one thing that we try to do is pay our employees at least 20% above market, anywhere we operate. And because we do that, it costs us more money, right? So it's harder for us to be profitable when we do things like that. But we have lower attrition. Our employees stay longer. We have fewer personnel problems. They want to be actively involved in the business. And that's huge. When you invest in people, and I know that's getting to be like a little cliche saying that.
Well, people still haven't really, committed to that. They talk about it, but I think businesses at large still aren't doing that.
Well, because they believe that they can control people's behavior, which is bullshit. Like you really can't control people's behavior. You give somebody a paycheck, and the best you can hope for is that you've influenced their behavior. But I feel like if your employees feel like they are a part of your business, and for ours they are a part of our business because we have an option pool for our employees.
Are you guys an ESOP?
Yes. Well, we're working toward that. So our employees own right now a minority share of our business, but we're working toward an ESOP type situation.
I spoke with Chris Height and Cody Smith from Dick's Height Plus Partners a few weeks ago, and they're an ESOP.
Yeah.
And
It's
there's
the way to go, I think.
And Earth Balance, they're a big native plant company. They do mitigation banking and restoration, and
Oh, okay.
also ESOP. But we
Nice.
digress. So how many employees do you have?
We have about 15 employees right now, so we're really small. But we have very little turnover. You know, when all the other manufacturing businesses in our area can't keep employees. I mean, I remember like VMA and all these other industry associations, and I'm always hearing it. You know, that we can't find good people. We can't find. I'm just sitting here going like, maybe we're just lucky, but we never have that problem. I mean, we just recently moved to Crescent City, and about 60% of our employees that were in Edgewater made the move with us voluntarily.
How far is Edgewater and
It's an hour.
Oh, wow.
It's an hour away. It's 70 miles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then we filled in the gap by hiring locally. And again, I mean, we put like 3 positions out, and we filled them in 4 days.
Great.
Yeah, and the people are still there.
Yeah.
So it's been
hiring
great.
is really hard. And
It's really hard.
yeah, you have to
Yeah.
treat your employees well, pay them well, give them a sense of purpose and a sense of ownership, and really, you know, never lose sight of how important it is to keep them engaged,
Right. Yeah.
because they are what makes the business run.
Yeah, and another thing too is, I mean, if you look at my LinkedIn, you probably saw I've said something about it, but the majority of our customers, of our shareholders, of our employees have, you know, a value set, right? Like, and we share a lot of the same values. I'm not saying we require that. That's just the way that it has happened. And, you know, around environmental issues, around social justice issues. And it's enabled us to be vocal about those things, about what we want to see, about what we want to support. And, I mean, yeah, we get some blowback from it. You know, we get some hate mail every now and then. But
You don't shy away from controversy, but that's good. You know, a business has to stand for something. It has to have a set of values and beliefs, which means that some people will find themselves on the opposite line.
yeah, I don't think we should seek out controversy, but it's going to happen. You know, you take a stand and defend it, and it's going to create some controversy. And I think a little bit of controversy is okay, but if you're standing up for people, for the environment, I don't think we should feel bad about that at all. I don't have a problem with it. I don't want to avoid controversy if that's what the controversy is.
Yeah, no, we do have to fight for certain things, and you know, conservation and the environment in Florida is something that needs to be.
It's a really dire situation.
It needs to be fought for. We need to stand up. We need to vote. We need to defend the environment, because, you know, people talk about the invisible hand of Adam Smith and self-regulating markets, and to an extent that's true, and I certainly am a fan of capitalism.
Sure, me too.
But you know, the problem with natural resources and the wild is that it succumbs to the tragedy of the commons.
Right.
Because it isn't governed by this invisible hand. It's outside that system. It's an externality. We all rely on it. We all benefit from it. We all depend upon the function of our natural resources and natural systems. But nobody owns it, and nobody has any kind of profit motive to defend it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we really have to step out of our comfort zone. You know, if you can't do it through your business, which I think you and I have that opportunity, because we found ways to build
The type of business that we're
yes,
in,
we found
right.
ways to be in businesses that impact the environment. But for Floridians, for people who are 5th generation, 6th generation Floridians, and people who just moved here, we really need to educate ourselves on what's going on with our natural resources.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really disheartening. I mean, it's I think that the how am I going to say this the right way? The developer set, right? Like, I would say real estate developers in general are aided ad extremis by the state government. Right? Their initiatives, their objectives are helped along by our elected officials, and conservation issues are not. So it makes it a very inequitable system right now, where it's basically people like us saying we need more conservation, we need more thoughtful development. Like, I'm a fan of capitalism. I'm not saying people don't have land rights. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be even large real estate developments. But just clear cutting, thousands of acres and putting 5,000 zero lot line tract homes made out of Chinese drywall, and they're ugly.
We need better land development regulations, for how we treat the land, the trees, the soil.
Yeah.
And what we put back. If we're going to build a house, let's bring the native plants back. Let's restore a functioning ecosystem. And I think we can do it, but you're right. The regulatory environment right now, it enables and favors the type of sprawl that we're getting. And
Right.
Florida is still struggling with sprawl.
Well, and I mentioned it earlier, but like my belief, which is pessimistic, is that Florida lacks a posterity mindset. There's not enough people that live here that care about the future. There's a lot of people like us that do. There's a lot of people that do, but there's not enough of them. There's not enough of us. There's a lot of people that have moved here, and I'm not trying to speak of them pejoratively. It's just the truth. The way that I see it is that people have moved here because they want to live out their golden years without responsibility, with minimal contribution to the civic aura, to the environmental welfare of the state, and they don't care about it. They don't know about it. They don't care about it maybe because they don't know about it, and that might be the education piece. But I think there's got to be way, way, way more activism, way more vocal opposition to policies that are deleterious to the environmental sovereignty of our state, because once these places are gone, they're gone. They're gone.
That's right. You
They're
don't
not
get them
coming
back. No.
And that's why, like you mentioned, mitigation. I think mitigation banking is actually a huge part of the problem, because it enables developers to destroy wetlands when they want to. All they got to do is pay money.
Compensatory mitigation.
It's a big scam. It's a scam. And the way I look at it is like, okay, you had a mitigation bank that used to be wetlands that was worth nothing, $0, and now it's worth money, and the developer gets to develop what they want, and the developer that also owns the mitigation bank over here gets to make money off of that. It's like a pyramid scheme. I can't stand it. Sorry. It's crazy, frustrating. It's like, why don't we just tell them, hey, you can't destroy the wetlands. You can't do it. Can we just try that out? I mean, that would be a real novel concept, right? Just why do they need it to fill in wetland? Just don't build there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what our forefathers would. They would have looked at that land and said, well, I guess we can't build there. It's a swamp.
Well, this is Florida.
Yeah, it's Florida, right?
Yeah. So what, going back to Yaupon Brothers' social, environmental mission, you guys are focusing on paying higher wages, which I find very interesting. Mm-hmm. How do you establish what the market rate is? You say you want to pay more, so how do you figure that out?
We just do a comparative analysis of what other like businesses are at least what we can find that they're paying people. So manufacturing is mainly our comp, you know, light manufacturing, and agriculture too. And agriculture too. But most of our employees, we don't have a huge, like our farm, we only have 3,000 trees right now. It's not a huge lift for them to go out and work in the field every once in a while, and most of them are doing both. So most of our employees are capable of doing both, and they are doing both. So we don't have any employees right now that are specifically agricultural workers, and that's all that they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you envision the business scaling in terms of employees? Is this a business that's going to have a lot of employees?
Actually, I think not. So my goal is to not substantially increase our headcount. So I think that actually on the agricultural side will be where we will make some additional hires, because our vision is eventually to have 25,000 trees on our own farm. So that requires some full-time management. But aside, in the factory, we're pretty good. Yeah, we don't really need to substantially increase our headcount in order to scale up production. So that was a planned move, but I think the industry itself could have quite a few employees, right? Especially on the production and agricultural side.
So you guys see yourselves more as a processing and marketing company, and you'll be purchasing raw Yaupon.
Yeah, I see us as an aggregator of value, right? So wherever the value is produced, we are the ones that are going to monetize it to the end user. So like we have the brand and the products that the consumers are eventually going to buy. But we supply all of our own material right now. In the future, I want that not to be the case. Right. These farmers that we're standing up, they're going to be supplying us. Maybe these other Yaupon producers will be supplying us. And I'm not saying all Yaupon in the universe is going to funnel through Yaupon Brothers, but I do think it's going to be an extremely important place in business to move the industry ahead. Just because that's the way that we're positioned.
Yeah, you need a strong brand and to build that industry. How many acres do you see in production, say, in 10 years?
Probably around 1,000.
In Florida?
Yeah, in Florida. Specifically Yaupon cultivation, 1,000 acres.
And how many do you think we have now?
Less than 100.
Mm-hmm. And are you farming it as a monocrop, or can this be integrated into a more regenerative farm system for Florida?
Yep, you can intercrop with it. We have a couple farmers that do intercrop, and then we have a couple of permaculture operations as well. So for sure, you can incorporate it into a regenerative landscape. It is inherently regenerative on its own too, because in most places it's replacing something like citrus, and it's creating actually ecological value where you're putting it. You know, you're putting Yaupon there, and now it's a home for wildlife, it's food for pollinators, and that wasn't there in the same way before. Like for instance, our farm was a citrus grove, and when we acquired it, all the citrus was gone, so it was just a big field with nothing in it, and it wasn't doing much of anything for the ecosystem, and now it is. So, you know, that's another thing, going back to saying we always said that we were going to transition some citrus over to Yaupon to demonstrate that it could be done, and that's what we're doing. So,
yeah, what was the name of the farm you bought?
Eagle's Nest. Yeah, Eagle's Nest Grove.
And this was historically an organic citrus grove?
Yeah. Yeah, it started in 1900. It was founded by a guy named Levant de Wolf, and he was a pioneer of organic agriculture in general. And this is long before organic was even a thing. He was a deeply religious man, and he believed that putting any form of chemical, anything, additives on his citrus was an aberration, and that it would conflict with his religious beliefs. And he gave several interviews about this over the years, so it's easy for us to document it. And then he sold the grove in the late 70s to a married couple, and they were the Mitchell family, and they certified the grove organic as soon as the NOP was a thing. So starting in 1990.
And they were able to produce some decent yields?
Yeah, they sold almost all of their crop to Whole Foods for years and years and years.
Fresh?
Yep. Wax coated fruit.
Uh-huh.
And they also operated a packing house that packed organic fruit for other producers.
And this packing house is on your farm now?
Still there. We're in the process of rehabilitating it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's about a 3,500 square foot building. It's not huge, but it's the original structure. It was, when it was operational, it was the northernmost operating packing house in the state.
Crescent City, yeah, that's pretty far north. I want to come visit. I'd love to see the Yaupon production and the old packing house. Who knows, maybe we can grow some Yaupon.
Oh, you should. You absolutely should. 100%.
Well, we've had to take out a lot of land that was in citrus.
Yeah.
The citrus greening is really catching up to the older trees, and with the hurricanes and just kind of repeated stressors, they can't produce. So we're taking out quite a lot of acres, and we're looking for alternative crops. I was talking to Brightman about seed farming for ground cover restoration and native plant seed farming. So that's on the list. I think Yaupon, that would be a good one to put on the list as well. So maybe we can.
We know where to get the trees.
Yeah. Well, from AgriStarts, right?
Yep. And he has a couple thousand of them ready to go right now.
Yeah. Well, I just love these plants that could be used in so many different ways. I had a really interesting talk with Pierce Jones about perennial peanut, and how it's used as a forage crop, how it's used as a turf alternative. We're using it as a cover crop in citrus. So there's certain plants that are just super plants because they provide so much benefit. And I'm starting to think that these plants that I refer to as super plants, they're just the ones that we happen to know about.
Yeah.
And if we continue to lean in and explore our curiosity about native plants, I think we'll discover more and more that there's hundreds of these super plants out there.
Oh, I guarantee it. I mean, I'm going to harken back to that conversation about the indigenous food systems that I just use Florida as an example, but everywhere else in North America could be a like-minded example, you know. And all of these indigenous cultures did not have a written language. So all these thousands of years of history, nothing was ever written down. And when they were extirpated from this area, it doesn't take but 1 or 2 generations.
Forget it all.
And everything is forgotten. And that's really what's happened in most of America. All these millennia of wisdom, we just lost it, basically. And I think it's something that really should be studied with more intensity, because I think we're losing out as a society on so many beneficial things.
Yeah.
You know, that worked for people for thousands and thousands of years. And those old ways are just sort of, we don't even know.
Well, we can rediscover them, and it starts with getting outside. And I think that's what's so wonderful about your story, is because it starts with you just, running through the woods and exploring, the region around you.
Yeah.
So how did that curiosity kind of, where did it come from for native plants? And
there's a hummingbird on your tree over there, just saying. I don't know. I feel like I have what in the 90s people would have considered to be behavioral problems. Like I'm super bored with things that I think are boring, and things that I don't think are boring I get really, really interested in. And native plants just happen for some reason to be one of the things. It started with all plants, right? Like when I was a little kid, it was just any form of plant. It didn't have to be a native plant. But as I got older and more knowledgeable about plants, I found native plants to be fascinating. And I think that it really stemmed from when I grew up in what is now called the Door Sleeper Spruce Creek Preserve. At the time it wasn't called that. It was owned by the Nature Conservancy. Now it's owned by the state mostly. But it's just this landscape that is just gorgeous. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. I think an old growth maritime hammock in Florida, it feels like you're inside of a cathedral to me. And I've always been captivated by it.
so what's in there, like sparkleberries and bluff oaks?
Well, yeah, that particular Door Sleeper specifically is an upland habitat. So it's a big bluff that goes down into this estuary called Spruce Creek, which is an outstanding Florida water. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the few places in the state where you can see 70-foot bluffs going straight down. So it's very scrubby. Has a lot of like Chapman oaks and scrub oaks and coontie and
Rusty Leonia.
Yeah, a lot of Rusty Leonia. Obviously a lot of saw palmetto because that's everywhere. But I love that area. I grew up in there. But if you go down a little bit, the elevation decreases. You get into that maritime hammock, and that's where you're going to find obviously a lot of palmetto, but it tends to be that silvery palmetto, and huge live oaks that have never been scarred by fire, so they're ancient, beautiful, just massive, with the Spanish moss and all these epiphytes. You get a lot of the encyclia orchids and a lot of bromeliads and a lot of the Simpson stopper that are huge. So the Mercian, so they have these
the size of your leg.
Yeah, very architectural looking orange trunks that kind of accent the landscape. And it's so old and massive and just hanging overhead, and it's just I've always thought it was amazing.
So you started researching these plants and reading up on them, and
I just wanted to know what they were all about. And it is an innate curiosity, but curiosity is a really important part of entrepreneurship. Being curious about things and experimenting with them is a key component to becoming a successful entrepreneur.
Has to be.
I mean, you have to always be learning and evolving and changing your approach to things, and otherwise you're just a boring business person. And there's a place for those people too, but I can't do that. I have to always be doing something.
I think for the founder, entrepreneur, there's no room for boring, right? Because you're creating something that doesn't exist. First, you have to have a vision of something that could be, that's not there and that most people don't see, and then the curiosity to learn and to innovate and to try different things.
Yep, exactly.
And then hopefully the tenaciousness and the persistence to to fight through the adversity.
Tenacity, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I wrote a little paper about tenacity in entrepreneurship, and I think it is such an important thing. It's so important, because building a new business, industry, whatever the case may be, it is so unbelievably challenging.
It's very hard.
It's so hard. I mean, it's the hardest thing I've ever done by a mile. Well, now I'm a new dad. That's pretty hard. But
Congratulations.
Thank you. But aside from that, it's really, really just daunting. And I think a lot of people don't expect that when they get started. They don't anticipate how hard it's going to be. And you've just always got to just plow through it. You got to plow through it. And I always tell people that there are no losers in entrepreneurship. There are only quitters. And I think that's a hugely important thing to think about, because being tenacious, sticking to it, not quitting when you want to quit, when you feel like all your options are exhausted, the best entrepreneurs, that's just when they're getting started.
Yeah.
You know?
There's so many no's before you get to a yes,
Yeah.
especially when you're creating something new, because people who don't have the vision assume that it won't work or that it's not possible. And at any rate, the whole world is organized in a way that excludes you.
Yes.
Right? Because
Yes.
your model, it doesn't exist.
Right.
So the whole framework is just anathema to what you're trying to do. So there's so many obstacles, and adversity really shapes the business.
Yeah, it does.
You know, it hones the business. It's, you know, pivot after pivot after pivot. You find yourself now with kind of a new set of skills, you know, new set of capabilities that you apply to your business, and you're looking for opportunities amidst these crises or setbacks.
Right.
And what I found that keeps us going is the ability to reframe the setback or the crisis from a setback or a crisis to a set of new opportunities.
Yeah.
And because we've been through a lot of things, you know, our business is now in its second generation, so, you know, I guess we've crossed some of the choppy seas that you're still navigating, but still, even, you know, in a second generation business, you're constantly faced with challenges every day on every front. And the ability to just put your head down and always be solving problems.
Yeah.
And relentlessly pressing in the direction of your vision.
Yeah. And I also feel like, but you are here like changing your business model a little bit. You know, you're looking at different ways to do things.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's still an uncharted territory, and the same rules apply. And there's going to be a lot of naysayers and a lot of people who don't understand it.
Yeah.
And it's just like being able to cut through that noise, because you know it's the right thing, and you know that it's going to be successful, and, you know, damn the consequences. And I think that's how I've always felt about it, for better or for worse. And it does turn off a lot of people, right? Because it comes off as crazy or arrogant or something. But there's a little bit of dose of all those. I think you got to have a little bit of dose of those things.
It's the reality distortion field.
Right, right.
It's irrational belief in your future success, which is rational, because the
Right.
way that belief affects performance, if you believe in yourself, you know, you're likely going to perform better.
I agree, 100%. And it almost like has a way of manifesting, you know, when you really feel like it's going to go, it's going to work, it somehow does.
It does.
It does, you know.
It may not be exactly the way that you had
Right.
envisioned it, but as you adapt, you know, there's this great book by Frédéric Laloux called Reinventing Organizations.
Oh.
And he talks about kind of this new paradigm for businesses that are going from a model of command and control to sense and respond.
Oh, I like that.
And this idea that, you know, organizations are living systems. They're dynamic, living, breathing
Yeah.
systems, and they are within a very dynamic and ever-changing context of whatever, their market, the economy, the community. And so the business leaders and the people in the business are sensing and responding, constantly adapting to the shifts in the field, solving problems, overcoming adversity, and seeking out opportunity. So he talks about an evolutionary purpose, and that you set out on your business journey with a sense of purpose, but that purpose ultimately is going to evolve. and morph as the organization senses and responds and goes through these, goes on its journey. And there's this sense of wholeness that the business is not just about making money. It's about how it supports its employees, stakeholders, shareholders, community, environment, the whole spectrum of what we were talking about.
Right.
And so I was actually really interested in learning about that book. The third pillar that he talks about is self-management or collaborative leadership, this idea of distributive decision-making in an organization.
Yeah.
Where, in a traditional hierarchy, traditional businesses in America were kind of modeled on the machine.
Yep.
Right? The industrial machine where you have a couple levers that one man can pull and then all of the gears start to turn. So it's that kind of top-down command and control. But if you take an ecosystem as the metaphor for the new American business, then you want distributive decision-making, where you have 15 people in your business. That's still 15 people who can be sensing and responding and making collaborative decisions.
Yeah.
And it surprises me still, because we've really been steeped in this culture at Cherry Lake and ING for decades, thanks to my parents. So that's really what I know. But I'm so surprised by how many organizations out there are still very much command and control. There's a few people who are empowered to make decisions, and everybody else just has to kind of be a cog in the wheel.
Yep, I see that a lot too. And I think culture is so important, because it's never going to function the way you want it to unless the culture is healthy and strong. And it's a hard thing to accomplish, right? To get people to buy into whatever your vision is, get them to feel like they're a part of it, take ownership of whatever their piece of that is, and run with it. And and we haven't always had success with it. It's been challenging, but one company I really admire is a company called Chobani, which I think you might know. It's a yogurt company.
Yeah.
And their founder and CEO, his name is Hamdi Ulukaya. He's an immigrant, and he believes very strongly in supporting immigration issues, but in a way that is different than what most businesses or people would approach. It's like he creates economic opportunities for immigrants, for refugees, and he doesn't always do it in the U.S. It's not always stateside. It might be about creating opportunities for somebody in Latin America, helping build supplier networks, or stand up new food businesses, or provide a little bit of their expertise and their resources in order to make that happen. And it moves the needle. It works. And what it also does is it makes their employees excited and fulfilled in what they're doing.
So he does this through his business. This is not a separate charity.
It's both.
It's both.
He does both. Yeah. But I mean, the employees that work there, they're into it. They're part of it.
They're part of it.
They feel like it's important. And I know a lot of our employees, they don't share my level of enthusiasm necessarily about like Florida's natural ecosystematics, But being here and observing, all of them have at least developed an appreciation for it.
Yeah, it rubs off.
Yeah.
It rubs off on others.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much everybody can develop an appreciation for something without becoming a subject matter expert in it. So I think that's part of our job, Tim, is just creating more appreciation for this sort of thing, getting people to understand why it's important, and at least identifying that it is important, and it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's ephemeral. Like if we don't take care of it, it's going to go away. And one thing I've said a lot, I wrote a lot of editorials over the last year or so, and I just think, now that I have a son, I'm like, man, there's a real danger that he will not be able to experience the things I got to experience as a child, the good things. And I think that's a pretty crummy inheritance to leave the next generation. Like, we have a responsibility to the people that come after us too, and what are we leaving behind? And I think if we examined the totality of the circumstances, for just using Florida as an example, but unfortunately it could be applied broadly, I don't know if we're leaving necessarily the best future ahead for the next generation, and I think that we should. So,
well, we had to make choices now going forwards that are going to change that narrative, because I think Florida is a very dichotomous state. There's, you know, a lot of polarization of ideas, a lot of polarization of values, and you could see it in the struggle for our natural resources and our natural environment.
Right.
You know, there's a real fight out there, and we have to engage somehow to do what we can to promote a better future for our children, right? To leave this place in a better state that doesn't take away from future generations' opportunities.
Yeah.
And we have to shift from an extractive model, which is taking away from natural resources and future generations in order to build profits, to a regenerative model.
Yep.
Which leverages the bounty and abundance of nature to create and generate value in a sustainable way. And I think that in our own individual cases, we've found a business path to work with nature in an ecologically responsible and harmonious way to generate value. And I hope that we can continue to spread that, not that message, but the way of thinking, like a mode of thinking that really seeks a win-win in how we pursue our personal and economic interest with the management of our natural resources and the promotion of a better future for Floridians. It's possible.
It is possible.
You have to change your mode of thinking.
Yeah. And we've got to help people become aware that this world of possibilities exists. Because I do think that's a big part of the problem, is it's just a lack of awareness. You know, people, they don't know that you could build something like this in your yard from native plants. They don't even, it doesn't enter into their mode of thinking. They were never taught to believe that. They were never led to believe that was possible. So it's really just providing that education, that information, and let people examine what they can accomplish, you know, with a set of facts. And I think that's a good step in the right direction.
And that's the role of the founder. And the visionary leader is to imagine the possibilities, to be curious and creative, and to show people that, you know, we can do things differently. We can create something out of nothing, and we could do it in a way that is supportive of our environment, of our communities, and of future generations.
Yeah.
I really respect what you're doing, Bryon, and commend you for, you know, going out there and launching a business, because that is takes a lot of courage and a lot of grit.
Hey, likewise, and I have tremendous respect for what you're doing, Tim, and I think this is a gorgeous place that you built, and I believe that you're going to move that needle and get more native plants in people's yards.
And you'll put native plants in our cupboard.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll get the whole full household spectrum between the two of us.
So how can people purchase Yaupon Brothers tea?
Well, if you're in Florida, please go to Whole Foods. That helps us out the most, right? It's available in every Whole Foods in the state of Florida. It's 41 locations. And if you can't find it there, please visit our website, which is yauponbrothers.com. And Amazon is a surefire bet, but make that your last stop, because it has very high fees.
Fantastic. And what are some of the flavors that I should try out next?
Well, we have 6 flavors in our core set. So those flavors are American Green, which is just straight up Yaupon, nothing in it. And then we have a Fire Roasted, which is pure Yaupon, but it's been fire roasted, so it has a tiny bit of smokiness. That's the way that a lot of indigenous cultures prepared Yaupon, was through fire roasting. We have our Florida Chai, which is like a masala chai, so it has cinnamon, cardamom, clove, peppercorn, kind of nice little spicy blend. We have our Lavender Coconut, which is really popular. It's been in Bon Appetit magazine, tasting table. We won a Made in the South award from Garden & Gun with that one. Revived Mint, which is just Yaupon and peppermint. And then we just launched a brand new one, which is called Spiced Peach, which is like peach and cinnamon.
Okay. And then you guys do some seasonal blends?
We do some seasonals. So in the fall we do a pumpkin spice, go figure, right? We jumped on that train. And then in the wintertime we do one called Winter Wassail, which is like a apple cider. Yeah.
Awesome.
Really good.
No, it is really good. I've got some at home right now, and I really appreciate you joining me and
appreciate you
sharing your story.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
All right, bye.